Hello and welcome to John and James Live. My name is John Hastings and with my co-host, Mr. James Celo, and with special guest from Mr. Organic Foods and his new venture in ID Health, Mr. Carlo Buckley. How are you today, sir?
I'm good, gents. How are you both?
Not bad. It looks sunny where you are.
It is.
Is it not sunny? It's beautiful here.
I'm in the UK, which is very rare.
It's never beautiful in Southampton, is it, James?
It's always beautiful,
Really?
every day, but especially today.
No, we got it.
You're telling me it's not sunny in London?
No, it's too smoky here. It's too smoky.
You're not living in 1900s.
We got a heat wave. We got a heat wave coming. It's going to be 30 degrees this week.
Get the speedos out, I think.
Oh.
Let's see. But Carlo, where should we start? Let's start at the beginning with Carlo, because we checked out. We had your colleague Lloyd Price on in the health tech space, and this is a new venture. Before we get into ID Health, let's start sort of at the beginning of Carlo growing up. Let's understand the person of how you got to where you got to now, because you was born in Liverpool, wasn't you?
Yeah. So my dad's side of the family from Liverpool and that region, and with the name Carlo, my mum's from Turin in Italy. So Anglo-Italian, born in Liverpool, born there, and so the early years of my life were living up there.
Why did they go there, Carlo, in the first place? Why was your parents end up in Liverpool? What was the?
It's just where my dad's family have,
migrated,
have lived there, and my mum had the pleasure of moving from Italy to the UK and to Liverpool, which is quite a different lifestyle, I think.
You got the Irish genes as well?
No, actually, Buckley is from Saddleworth, actually, sort of Lancashire. Is it Lancashire or Yorkshire? Right. Is where my sort of paternal side of the family come from. So yeah, all around sort of Liverpool, Manchester area, I suppose. Although
no hint of an accent, mate.
Yeah, well, so my mother developed postpartum psychosis after my elder brother was born. I've got one older brother, and that led to the unfortunate situation of my parents splitting up, and my father unusually got custody of my brother and I, which was quite unusual. This was sort of in the early 80s. I was born in 1980, and because my father was working abroad a lot, the judge basically said, the only way to do this is if your kid's going to boarding school. So at the age of 6, I was shipped off to boarding school with my brother, who was 8 at the time. And my mother returned to Italy. So that's kind of had quite a profound impact on my upbringing and my life in general, really. And it's particularly relevant to what we're doing with ID Health, which we can come on to later. But I've sort of seen firsthand the kind of damage that mental ill health can do, not just to individuals, but to the broader family. And it's something that I've had to deal with and live with as a child and as an adult. Probably don't have a Scouse accent because at the age of 6 I was shipped off to boarding school.
James was as well, actually. James went to boarding school at 6, and that's quite affected him quite a bit, isn't it? On that, it's quite a harsh thing to happen, isn't it?
It is very young, and I don't know if you got.
Yeah,
you've got 4 kids.
Yeah, I've got 4 kids. So
you could never imagine sending them to boarding school at the age of 6, right?
No, I've got a 10-year-old, 8, a 6, and a 4. So I've got 3 girls and a boy. And my son, who's number 3, he just turned 6 a couple of months ago. And I look at how little he is and how vulnerable you are at that age. And, so, to kind of be sort of removed from the sort of family home and taken into boarding school at that age is, not what I would wish on anyone, really. But to be fair, I probably blocked a lot of things out from that time. But I loved boarding. I loved school. Apart from the kind of initial sort of period. Overall, it was a really positive experience for me, I must say.
Did it represent some stability for you? I mean, for me, looking back, it wasn't great, but then there was so much instability for me growing up as well. So did it represent that for you, that where your dad was working away and your mum then was back in Italy with her challenging mental issues?
I suppose to a degree, but up until that point, we'd lived quite happily, in at home with my mum. So you don't really kind of know what's going on with your parents at that age.
Yeah,
really.
You're too young, aren't you?
You're too young to know what's going on, kind of thing. And I've got two very loving parents, so as individuals, I mean, they had their own sort of difficulties and stuff, but no, I think it did present stability and routine, and you're institutionalized to a degree, really. You become very independent very quickly and kind of have to survive in a slightly different environment, which a lot of people view it as being very privileged. And I think as I grew up, I realized how lucky I was to be in that kind of environment. If I compared it to the kind of the life that my mother then led after that point, it was kind of chalk and cheese, really. It was sort of the opposite ends of the spectrum almost, in terms of privilege and sort of versus poverty and struggle. So I've almost led a schizophrenic life just in those two spheres.
Yeah, I could imagine it could be super difficult. What is postpartum psychosis, and how does that show up in a person? What's the symptoms of that?
Sort of paranoid schizophrenia. It's in my mother's case, she thought she was being sort of poisoned. You become very paranoid about things. In particular, a lot of it was directed towards my father, and I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this kind of stuff live. My mother's not around anymore. She died during COVID from a heart attack. She wasn't taking her blood pressure medication. So paranoia and things like that. So growing up, we never had a television or a phone in the house. She would, be very suspicious of people, and that the world was kind of against her, and all sorts of strange things happening, changing clothes during the day to disguise oneself, that kind of thing. So that's how it manifests itself. And a lot of women struggle after giving birth. A lot happens with your hormones, and people can get women can get very depressed after childbirth. And so back then, so I was born in 1980, my brother was born in January 79. There were really, mental treatment and mental health conditions has come on a lot since then. I mean, it's still, been chronically underfunded, and nowhere near where it needs to be even today. But back then, you're talking about some pretty nasty drugs. They used to still kind of electrocute people and do all sorts of nasty things. Difficult time to be, to have a mental health problem, and particularly for a woman who then went back to Italy. Before she married my father, she was a very successful career woman. She had a very good career working for some of Italy's sort of biggest companies, right at the sort of top level. And to be a woman in your late 40s trying to find work when you have a mental health problem was impossible. So difficult times.
Okay. What was your father doing, Carlo? What was his?
He was an accountant. He worked at Coopers and Lybrand, Deloitte before the consolidation into the Big Four. And actually, he had the opportunity to open their office in Brussels. And he thought that my mother would prefer a more continental lifestyle than up in the northwest of the UK. So they decided they were going to move out there with me and my brother. My dad signed a 5-year contract, and then my mum decided not to come across. So he was stuck out there whilst we were, stuck here, in the UK. So very difficult time for him to not be able to see his kids sort of growing up. And it just got to a stage where, they had to go their own formally go their own separate ways. So
so our parents are both divorced, aren't they, James? So we get it. Early similar ages as well. Yeah, James.
There's lots and lots of similarities here, mate. You're in pretty good company, to be fair. So I want to go back to what we were talking about earlier before we came on live, is how much that's impacted on you and what you do now, this kind of mission that you're on to improve mental health. I mean, health generally comes into that. So how do you take all of that emotion, all of that former life, with everything that makes that up? It's not just one aspect. There's so many different layers to it. How do you sort of use that and galvanize yourself to create something and motivate yourself on a daily basis to put something like you're doing now into the world?
I mean, I think it's worth just going back a little bit in time as well. So I went through school. I studied biological sciences at university, chemistry and biology A level. So, got a good sort of base understanding of biology and how organisms work, at a high level. I then became a lawyer. So when I was at university, I realized that you could go and become a lawyer without having done a law degree. And I was fortunate enough to get a training contract with a firm called Baker McKenzie in the city of London. Went through 2 years of law school, did 2 years of training with them, and then qualified into mergers and acquisitions sort of law. And, that was a phenomenal sort of grounding and professional qualification to get, because it stood me in really good stead in terms of like running your own business. But, quite early on, I knew that it wasn't going to be the career that I wanted. I didn't want my legacy to be what were called transaction Bibles. So every time you did a deal or were involved in buying or selling a company, you'd have like a lever arch folder with all the transaction documents in it. And I thought, my life can't boil down to just being a bunch of lever arch files on a shelf.
They read it out at your funeral, and they
and I was, I was deeply unhappy. I was deeply unhappy. Had I gone to see anyone, I'm pretty sure they would have diagnosed me with depression and,
PTSD.
It was brutal. Corporate law is brutal. It was like all-nighters, and I used to come into a partner's office on a Friday sort of evening, hoping to go home and see my friends and family at the weekend, and then they would tell you about some exciting deal that needed to be worked on over the weekend. So you had little control over your life, which is something that I've come to realize I need to have. Like, I'm a bit of a control freak in many respects, although quite laid back in others. But I realized at that point that I was not well, and that I was the only one that was going to dig myself out of the hole. I couldn't, and I suppose, your upbringing kind of, the responsibility was on my shoulders to do something about my situation, because that's kind of the way I'd grown up. No one was going to do it for me. So I left.
How old was you, Carlo, when you was working in this, and how did that sort of depressive feeling show up? What was it like? You didn't want to get out of bed, or you just was drinking alcohol?
Yeah, I was drinking. I was drinking a lot of, boozing a lot, and I don't know. It's hard to say. I was 27 at the time, and London. I mean, I think things have changed quite a lot. 27-year-olds don't drink as much as they used to now. It's almost, it's unaffordable to drink, particularly in
cocaine now, isn't it?
Probably, yeah. But back in, when I was sort of in my mid to late 20s, the drinking culture was still very much alive in the UK, and so at every opportunity, you'd kind of go out drinking, and I was just very unhappy. I can only explain it as having like almost an allergic reaction to the situation, and I needed to get out, and so I did.
That's hard to get out, Carlo, though, isn't it? When you're getting paid every month, you're probably getting a healthy salary. Like, really, things look good on the outside, don't they? But how hard is it to break that, to like not have that salary?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's hard, because most people would bite your arm off to have that, to be paid that kind of money. But it's a weird profession, because you get judged on your billable hours. So it's like your input is what matters. It's like how many hours you work is
what you get out,
obviously your clients have got to be happy with your work and stuff, but it's like the more you work, the better, right? And judging anything on inputs is never good, in my opinion. And actually, just quickly going to like healthcare, you hear sort of Wes Streeting talking about the reforms within the NHS and how it's going to move from a measuring inputs to actually measuring outputs, results, right? And that's what I really wanted to measure myself on, like what impact and what results I could have as an individual. So I left law. I had a stint importing and selling organic food ingredients. So we were importing all sorts of stuff into the UK, selling it to baby food manufacturers in the UK, Europe, basically any organic sort of food product that you could buy. We used to supply one or other sort of ingredient to. So it was literally gone from kind of really like technical, legal sort of job to basically being chucked a book of contacts and saying, here you go, phone them all up and start selling some stuff to them.
How'd you get involved in that? Where's that come from?
Just a like a family
random
contact.
thing.
Family contact, worked at this company, and I thought, food, I'm interested in food, why not? It's interesting, let's just give it a go. And so that's how I kind of got into the food industry, really.
But throwing yourself in the deep end, though, mate, wasn't it? It's just like, here's a manual, off you go.
It was like cold call all these people and start selling whatever we've got on stock, or start understanding what these people want, and we will find that particular ingredient for them and sell it to them. It was trading. It was like the polar opposite of kind of the cerebral conversations you have around warranties and indemnities in a share purchase agreement and all of those kind of things. So it was quite a culture shock as well, because everyone left at 5 o'clock and I was like, what's going on here? I was like, almost felt like, it was just weird. It was very odd.
How did you feel,
find
Carlo?
it easy? Was it easy in comparison to what you were doing before, or
not really? Because I'm quite a sort of shy person, so I'd never cold called anyone in my life really, and so it was a really good sort of personal development to just have to try and phone someone and sell them something.
Yeah,
but
it grind it out.
Yeah, you kind of understood after a while, that selling isn't just about, you're not selling something, you're providing a solution, whatever that sort of might be. And so, you really had to kind of understand the priorities of your customers, et cetera, but it was really good to kind of get behind the skin of the food industry, visited lots of food manufacturers, both here and in the UK and in Europe, and kind of understood the kind of global flow of materials and ingredients that go into all of our foods, so that when you walk down the supermarket aisle and you see all these branded products on the shelf, you actually know, you've been to the factories where they're produced, you know what goes into them, how they're manufactured and stuff. And it's really, really interesting. And that kind of stood me up for, co-founding Mr. Organic with two other guys, because I speak Italian. I was doing a lot of work in Italy, and we were buying bulk tomato products from this manufacturer just outside Rome and selling them to like ready meal manufacturers here in the UK, or soup manufacturers. Sure. And it was on one of my visits to see Valerio, who's one of my co-founders in Mr. Organic, that all sort of came about. He was I can't remember what generation sort of tomato producer he comes from, but he was doing bulk organic. He was the only at the time, and I think it's still the case, he was the only sort of producer of solely organic sort of tomato products. Some people would do non-organic and a little bit of organic on the side. He was kind of dedicated to just organic. And he was doing bulk stuff, so big 200 kilo drums of chopped tomatoes that go into food manufacturing. But he was also producing retail products for third-party brands in Germany and other European countries, but also in the UK. And he was a bit fed up of the brands going to him, look, if you don't give me 2 € discount on your tins of chopped tomatoes, I'm going to go to one of your competitors, and that's quite often the reality of a food, of a third-party manufacturer.
Yeah.
And it was at a time when, before the financial crash of 2009, when brands like Stella Artois were advertising with the slogan "reassuringly expensive," when the economy was in the UK doing really well, and you could basically put the word organic on any product and charge double the price for it, and people would buy it. And it had, it didn't matter where it came from, what the quality was, anything like that. And we felt that, as a biologist and someone interested in conservation and the natural world, we wanted to, like Valerio wanted to take control and launch his own brand, so that you weren't constantly having to renegotiate with customers and give them discounts, or they leave you and go and produce elsewhere.
Yeah.
And we thought it was ridiculous that, people were charging such high prices for organic products, regardless of quality. And we thought that was a limiting factor in growing the organic food market. Because in our minds, we were like, if we launch an affordable organic brand, and the more people buy organic, the more land and farmland we can convert to organic agriculture, the more we can protect our environment, and keep biodiversity in sort of farming practices. The more people are eating sort of healthier, better products manufactured in a sort of sustainable way. That was kind of like our original sort of thesis behind Mr. Organic. Of course, I had no idea about selling retail food products. I had no idea about actually setting up or running a business. So it was on a visit to see him. He'd had this idea for Mr. Organic, and he'd actually tried to launch some products already in the UK, and it hadn't really gone anywhere. He said, "Look, Carlo, do you fancy doing this?" And I had a drive from Rome to Milan to go and see another supplier or customer, I can't remember now. And on that drive, I thought, I'm gonna
give this a go.
I'm gonna do this, because I also thought, we were quite unusual in that we had sort of vertical integration in terms of like manufacturing and also sort of farms. And a lot of Italian products in the UK are Italian style. They're not like authentic, or they weren't back then. There are a few more now. They weren't sort of authentic Italian produced products. Most sort of pasta sauces were either manufactured in Holland or the UK using, ingredients from some God knows where, So I thought, you know what, we're going to give this a go. Yeah.
And how was you feeling during this transition? Did the sort of depressive state lift as soon as you left M&A's? Was you feeling starting to feel lighter, much better?
Yeah. No, I kind of got control of my destiny in a way. And I was like, I will, when I left law, I said to myself, I'm not going to do any job, or I'm not going to do anything in my life that I don't get fulfillment from. And that was kind of a mantra that I've tried to stay true to ever since. And so, Mr. Organic was kind of like the real sort of first step on that journey of, doing something with real sort of impact. But as soon as we launched, so I left the company that I was working at, and I'm basically rented out. I bought a flat with my brother when I was a lawyer, and we were living together. I rented that out and moved back in with my dad to reduce any sort of expenditure as possible. And we bootstrapped Mr. Organic. We didn't take any external investment at all. I had to learn how to, I was like a Swiss Army penknife for quite a while, doing every single sort of role, whether it's sales, logistics. I did all the bookkeeping. I learned how to use Sage, the accounting package. I put structures in place to kind of, all the sort of supply chain type stuff. I had a Vespa that I'd go around stores in London with a backpack full of pasta sauces, literally going door to door to shops and selling whatever I could, or trying to get them to put it on the shelf, and doing in-store sampling. All of that stuff. It was really like grassroots sort of, activity. And Abel and Cole was one of our first customers. That was a big help. So they're a direct sort of consumer, ethical, sustainable, organic food supermarket online. They were one of our first big customers. But other than that, it was like going to health food stores, and then we'd get a collection of health food stores, and then you'd get a wholesaler on board that would then be able to sort of service those stores, and you'd be able to grow more quickly because you're in a wholesaler that could, so it was, it was an amazing kind of learning, but it was pretty backbreaking. It was pretty exhausting because Valerio was out in Italy. He was dealing with all the manufacturing, and we'd ship, containers of product over.
What was the product, Carlo, at that point? Was it just?
It was mostly tomato products. It was like pasta sauces. We still do have an amazing ketchup. It was tomato sauces, tinned tomatoes, and those mainly tomato based.
How did you choose the product range? Why didn't you go for baby products or adult products? How did you come up with thinking, right, let's go for a
That's what Valerio was good at producing. Like, he had some really great products, and we were like, within pasta sauces, there are no like authentic Italian products in retail.
Dolmio, is that one?
Dolmio, yeah, shocking. It's terrible.
Is that not authentic?
It's about as Italian as,
who knew?
It's
a tikka masala.
Yeah, exactly. Produced probably in the Netherlands, I think. I don't know where they get their tomatoes from, but
so I can imagine as soon as you say organic, Carlo, you're going to get the challenge of people thinking, well, price point. And then secondly is like, is it authentically, and how do you qualify it as being organic? Because there must be several shades of what actually organic means, and just by putting it on the label can bump the price up 20%, 30%, whatever. So there's that level of expectation, isn't it, that you're getting an organic product, but you don't actually know what the qualities or the qualification for organic is. So talk us through the challenges in the marketplace of those two elements of first being price point, second being whether it actually is organic or not.
Yeah, I mean, we learned pretty quickly about sort of price points. So obviously, you know, farming organic food, whether it's, you know, vegetables or, you know, sort of arable farming or livestock, you know, it's generally on a sort of smaller scale. So you don't have the economies of scale. You also don't benefit from a lot of the subsidies that conventional farming has benefited from over the years. I know things have changed in the UK a little bit since sort of Brexit, but I kind of see organic sort of production as being more closely aligned to the real cost of producing a food product. Whereas if you're producing, you know, with lots of agrochemicals and receiving subsidies, your kind of the cost of production is kind of muddied by these other sort of mechanisms. But we learned pretty quickly that soon after we launched the brand, financial crash happened and the economy changed literally overnight. And from going from a situation where organic sort of food products, people would buy them and pay the ridiculous amounts of money, people stopped doing that, and supermarkets killed organic. They just took so many organic products off the supermarket shelves and they started investing in like value ranges and stuff like that. The other thing that happened was that the euro reached parity with sterling at one point. So we're buying everything in euros and selling them in sterling. You know, so you know, all of these things together made us think really, really hard about what our value proposition was. You know, and because we didn't have loads of money, which was probably a good thing, to be honest with you, because I probably at that time wouldn't have known what the best way of spending it was. We had to kind of like really be like super like focused on what our value proposition was, which was all about, you know, it wasn't just about organic agriculture. It was about like literally, you know, the best tasting product produced in the sustainable way with a real narrative and a story. You know, we could show people the fields where the tomatoes grew and ripened under the sun, you know, just outside Rome. And so we had provenance, we had quality, we had, you know, all of these things that a lot of other brands didn't have. And so by telling that story and having products that were still, you know, affordably priced, I mean, they weren't Dolmio, because you know, you literally can't produce a good quality product for that price point. And that was, you know, I can't remember if it's Dolmio or the other ones owned by Unilever or Mars, Master Foods and stuff. So they've got economies of scale, like, you know that we couldn't achieve. But you had to really think really carefully about, like, really understand your consumer and how to connect with people. And, you know, I think people buy products that their values align to increasingly now than ever. And that's been a journey that we've been on. Like, we're a B Corporation now. You know, even like Abel and Cole used to send back dented tins because they were like, we can't give these to our customers. And I had a van, and I was like, apart from eating them myself, which I used to do to save money, because I wasn't, you know, spent a year working, didn't earn anything from the business or anything like that. So eating kind of rejected tins of whatever, chickpeas or for lunch. We started taking them to like I started taking them to like local food banks, you know, to churches and to places where they had food banks in Southwest London, where we were based. And now we work with the likes of the Trussell Trust, and we do quite a lot around sort of food poverty and stuff like that. So yeah, it was an interesting journey. That at a certain point, I was so sort of burnt out and exhausted after 3 years that I needed to take a bit of a step back from that business.
Because it did take off, didn't it? It did really well. You started to get in the door of quite a few of the high street retailers,
high street retailers, Holland and Barrett, Waitrose. You know, we had some products in Aldi for a time and in Co-op, but you know, it's a brutal industry, and you know, we do grow year on year. I mean, we're not a massive brand, but we're very established. But it's taken a long time. You know, it takes, I think what people don't realize is actually how long it takes, particularly, you know, we had no investors. We did everything through cash flow and extended terms.
What year did you start? What was it?
2009.
Okay, so
wow.
it's been a long 16-year journey, hasn't it?
Yeah.
People don't
So you've never
realize
taken investment. You've never had external investment.
Never.
Even today.
Wow. No, we had a 20 grand overdraft, which at some point we stopped using. And, you know,
have you had any offers? Has anybody come knocking saying we'd like to invest?
No, not yet. We've not sort of courted investment or anything like that. You know, I think, you know, now you look at sort of startups and you look at, you know, people praise the top line, you know, more than anything. And I think actually, you know, it's really important to have a pathway to profitability, you know, and you know, the vanity metrics are ones that just don't resonate with me at all. It's about, you know, growing a sustainable and resilient business. And I think with Mr. Organic, we've done that because of the way that we've developed it. And, you know, I give, you know, Valerio and the team all the credit. But it, you know, I think that's another reason why, you know, starting a business in possibly the worst economic climate in modern times is a really good place to start, because you're under no, you know, every win is hard fought, and you're under no illusion as to why people are buying your products. They're buying them because they believe in what you're doing. They're not buying them just because they've got loads of free cash, or that they're, you know, it's all of these things are discretionary, right? At the end of the day, you know, they could choose your products, they could choose, you know, any number of others. So it was good, and I liken it to the times now, you know, that we're launching. You know, we launched ID Health recently, you know, in an environment where the NHS can't be under more pressure than it has been, you know, post-COVID and stuff. So, and in a time where it's very, very difficult to raise money as well. So I think if we can get through this period with ID Health, then that stands us in pretty good stead. But a lot of learnings, I've taken a lot of learnings from Mr. Organic and the subsequent sort of enterprises I've been involved in since into what we're doing today.
So give us a short introduction to ID Health, and what is it? Is it an online platform? What are you looking to achieve with it? Yeah,
so we've built some pretty interesting technology to be able to produce capsule-based medicines at personalized doses, but to do that cost effectively and at scale. And we can also combine multiple drugs into single capsules using this novel manufacturing platform. And we were lucky enough to get a pretty substantial Innovate UK grant as part of their Transforming Medicines Manufacturing program to kind of start that work. And we've got some, you know, we raised a kind of an angel round, and we are looking to have that capability to underpin a broader health tech solution that can effectively close the loop between patient and prescriber and, you know, the medicine that they take to, you know, really deliver personalized medicine at scale. So every aspect of our life is personalized, right? From the playlists that we listen to, the clothes, the shoes, you know, we have ultimate choice in what we buy, what we spend our money on. You don't walk around, you know, there aren't just 3 sizes of shoes to wear, right? There's, you know, lots of different sizes of shoes to fit you. But when it comes to medicines, basically there's pretty much a one size fits all approach. You know, manufacturing technology for producing medicines hasn't changed in like 100 years or more. And so we're in a situation where, you know, we have a lot of medication wastage. We have a lot of non-adherence to medication due to side effects. We have a lot of medication that doesn't work on, you know, a large proportion of the population. You know, clinical trials are historically done on 80-kilo white men, you know.
So me.
We live in an infinitely more diverse, you know, planet than 80-kilo white men. But that's basically what sort of drugs have been licensed on, and what dosages are sort of available. And so, you know, this one size fits all really doesn't sort of work very well. And in 2025, we should be doing better. We really should be doing better to be able to deliver precision and personalized care. And I'm not talking about sort of new modalities of therapeutics. Like, I'm just talking about the right drug at the right dose for the right amount of time. You know, it's not, it shouldn't be rocket science, and it's not. I mean, the barriers to getting this adopted at scale are substantial. But it's not rocket science, not beyond the will of man to, you know.
Yeah.
And how did you come up with this idea, Carlo? Where did you start off with formulating the idea, validating the idea, finding the problem? Where did this come about?
Yeah, so I, after kind of taking a step back from Mr. Organic and being the kind of one driving that business forward, I spent some time in the US. I launched a snack business in the US, a pouch-based superfood snack product, and it got acquired by a company in North Carolina that at the time were developing technology to produce personalized nutritional supplements in pouches. Yeah. So the thing with supplements is to get a therapeutic or enough of the active ingredient into a product, it's very difficult to use capsules, because you'd be taking like 8 to 10 capsules a day if you want genuinely, truly sort of personalized, multi-active, you know, solution basically. But you can, you know, if you put it into a pouch, and by pouch I mean like a squeeze pouch, like either those gel packs that you get like energy of, you know, if you're cycling or whatever, or like baby food pouches, those kind of things, those flexible pouches. And they were developing, they're in the early stages of developing this new technology, that they ended up actually acquiring the business that I launched in the US, and it wasn't successful. You know, it was a bit of a disaster actually. You know, it was a lot of learning taken from that as to how to launch or not launch a brand, or the challenges of launching a brand in the US market. So I learned a lot through it, but it wasn't ultimately successful. But as part of that transaction, got to know the guys in North Carolina, and so I've always been in touch with them. And you know, some great robotics and automation kind of expertise there. And so we came together recently to develop this capsule filling technology. And that's kind of how it came about. So developing the capsule fill technology was the start of the journey to deliver personalized medicine, because, you know, we've talked about personalized medicine for decades. You know, we've got, you know, we can track biomarkers much more easily. There's wearable devices which can give you, you know, you can track your biomarkers on a continuous basis. We've got pharmacogenomics, so you can analyze people's genes and see whether drugs work on people or not, or whether they're fast or slow metabolizers, which will impact the dose that you give to people. You know, now we've got things like AI, which can help kind of, you know, do things a lot more sort of rapidly. But we've always been sort of stuck because there's no way of actually delivering those dose personalized therapeutics at scale. And so that's why we've developed this manufacturing technology, and we're looking to deploy it sort of into 3 main areas. One is mental health, so psychiatric medication, and in particular, you know, providing a safe and effective way for people to come off antidepressants and other dependency creating medication, where if you come off too quickly, you develop, or many people develop pretty horrendous withdrawal symptoms, because like we've got 8.7 million people in England alone on antidepressants. Long-term use has doubled over the last
shocking, isn't it? The amount
10 years.
It's incredible.
Drugs taken.
You know, even in, you know, in the Sunday Times, there was a good article about basically how, you know, women have been overprescribed this medication because they go to their GP and they've been prescribed antidepressants rather than hormone replacement therapy, you know, due to the symptoms of perimenopause or menopause overlapping with depression. And so you've got a whole generation of women in their 50s now that, you know, are really struggling to come off the medication, and long-term use of these drugs has been shown to be more harm than benefit. in terms of weight gain, emotional blunting, sexual dysfunction. So and there's no good way of getting people off. You have to step down gradually over time. And so we're working with some of the leaders in that field to deploy our technology for that use. But that's why we're also developing this overarching platform that can give patients and prescribers the tools to be able to come off. Because it's not just about providing the medicines at the right dose at the right time. It's also like removing the other barriers to why this doesn't happen in practice. And it doesn't happen in practice because GPs have got like 7 or maybe 10 minutes to treat a patient.
Exactly.
And we don't have the resources to be, reviewing patients' medication on an almost continuous basis. And then there's the subject of how these these drugs were licensed off the back of 8 to 12 week clinical trials. And we've got people on these drugs for years now, and that's quite a different sort of scenario.
So how's the industry as a whole, Carlo? Would you describe the pharmaceutical industry as being supportive and championing what you're trying to do, or is there pushback? Is the more institutionalized?
Yeah, so
sort of members of this community, let's say, are they a little bit worried that this kind of
stepping on
wet
toes
behind the ears kind of guys coming in trying to disrupt the industry a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a really clear regulatory pathway to market. So here in the UK, so the products that come off our machine they're unlicensed medicines. So they don't have a marketing authorization because you can't actually get a marketing authorization for a drug at effectively what is an infinite sort of dose range. You have to say, okay, well, I'm going to do it at 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams, or whatever.
Yeah.
But there is an industry, and it's been around for decades, whereby a physician, a doctor, can write a prescription for essentially a personalized medicine that can go off to a facility, a regulated facility, to be manufactured. So regulated by the MHRA, produced to GMP standards, which are the quality standards that pharma products need to be produced at, and given to a patient. Happens a lot in pediatrics. So most licensed medication are licensed at doses that are applicable to adults. And so there are a lot of these specials, or in the US, they're called compounded medicines, which are used in pediatrics. Or if you've got swallowing difficulties and you need it in a liquid rather than a pill, then the doctor can write a prescription for the liquid version, and it can be produced in a regulated manner and safe manner and given to patients. The challenge with that is that typically they're produced by a human in a lab, so they're very expensive to produce.
Yeah.
And the health service has been, looking to minimize costs, and so the prescribing of these sorts of medications has been sort of discouraged from a cost perspective, but also a quality perspective, because there is no sort of set formulation for a product. If you send it to one manufacturer or another, it could come back as being different quality. They might use other excipients in the products, or allergens, for example, or whatever it might be. And so there are quality concerns as well, legitimate ones. But nonetheless, there is a regulatory framework that we can go to market. And we're talking about generic medicines where the active pharmaceutical ingredient is readily available. So we've actually had limited engagement with pharma up until this point, because we've not necessarily had to. We're very actively engaged in this sort of more personalized side of the market. And so with the company that we're working with quite closely is a company called Fagron, who are the kind of global market leader in compounding. They've got facilities in Europe and the US, and they're sort of regarded as kind of the gold standard when it comes to producing these sorts of medicines, both from a formulation and testing perspective. So there are lots of barriers, because then translating that into something that is widely adopted is probably going to be our biggest challenge. But when we talk to sort of healthcare professionals and people within the NHS in particular, they get it makes sense what we're trying to do, but the barriers to implementation are substantial. So what we've been doing is we've been trying to engage with as many people at as many levels of the NHS to kind of understand their needs, really. We're not trying to design and build something and sell into them. We're trying to co-design and develop a solution hand in glove with the relevant stakeholders. And so there is this big unmet need in deprescribing of antidepressants and other dependency creating medications. The other area we're working in is pediatrics. So we're working with some NHS hospital trusts, developing solutions for kids, where hopefully we hope we can provide a more practical, safer and cheaper solution than some of the expensive liquid formulations that are currently being used. And then the other one is sort of cardiovascular disease, which is more around combining multiple different drugs into a single capsule. And the reason for doing that is because when people get prescribed multiple medications, 50% of people stop taking them as prescribed after 6 months. If you've got comorbidities, then your pill burden can be pretty extreme. And in a lot of cases, you're being medicated for the side effects of another pill that you're on. And so, lots of factors at play, and we've got a long road ahead of us. But, going back to kind of, the motivations for why I'm doing this, I have a deep well of motivation from a personal perspective, from my experience with my mother, my experience with Mr. Organic, where, you have to develop a lot of resilience because you're kicked in the gut, the whole time you're told, no, you can't do this. And you just find a way, of doing it. And it's about, getting those champions, those early adopters. But I've got 4 kids as well. I've got 3 girls, and a boy, I don't want to leave him out of it, but we live in a world of inequality currently. And, I want them to grow up in a world where they, particularly my girls, don't have to face the kind of inequality that generations, prior to them have had to face. So lots to unpick, and we probably don't have enough time to go into all
yeah.
So
I wanted to get your views on just the general sort of view on health and well-being over the last 50 years, because it's not going in a very good trajectory, is it, in multiple areas? What do you think? Why do you think that is, or what do you think we can do about it?
I think I think organizations like the NHS are almost between a rock and a hard place. Yes, things can improve. Yes, we can be more efficient. We can certainly, create better working environment for NHS workers who, give their life and soul to, to helping people. But frankly, until we can sort out the social determinants for ill health, and that is both physical and mental health.
Yeah.
And because, the drivers of ill health are determined by social factors, economic deprivation, education, the food system that we have, and I think there are, very simplistically, I think that, the food that we eat is poor quality, the ultra processed, and we're getting ill because of the food that we eat. We're getting ill both physically and mentally because of the level of inactivity that we are doing as a species. We're not doing anywhere near enough movement. I'm not talking just like exercise. I mean, just enough sort of moving around. We've got big tech companies that are making it disincentivizing movement. One of the biggest factors of ill health, particularly mental ill health, is loneliness. We're hyper connected from a technology perspective, and yet we've never been more lonely than ever before. So unless we can, come to grips with all of these factors which are leading people to become obese or to have mental health problems, I think we're, no matter how efficient we make the health service, And we have an incredible health service here compared to, you know, the US model, for example.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't lay the blame at, you know, the NHS. You know, as a society, we need to do better, you know, and that does start with government, and it does, you know, but as a, you know, businesses can do better. And that's why, you know, what we're doing, you know, with Mr. Organic and being a B corporation and doing our bit to, you know, to help sort of the broader society. We need to get to grips with these problems, because otherwise I think we're going to be continuously chasing our tails as a health service, particularly in this country. We have to reduce the demand on the health service, and I think we can only do that in a more holistic sort of way. So we need to deal with the biopsychosocial determinants of ill health.
Yeah, I think the foundational bit, the foundational piece I was just about to say is it's got to be mental health, isn't it? Everything feeds off of that. You know, your desire to eat more healthy, to become more active. You know, if the desire fundamentally isn't there because of your mental health, then
they're intrinsically
it's not going to work. It cannot be ignored. Health. It has to start with that, doesn't it? It has to start there.
It does, and you know, but we also need to, you know, be more resilient. You know, one of the things that, you know, you have growing up in a boarding school is that, you know, the stick is sort of more prominent than the carrot, right? You know, and I see it with my kids. You know, people need tough love, you know, and I mean that in the kind of nicest way possible. Then, you know, people need to take accountability for their own actions as well. But we need to build a society and a system which enables that, which doesn't keep, you know, people stuck. You know, if you look at, you know, you can tell someone's life expectancy from the postcode that they live in. You know, that's shocking. You know, you know, where you live and where you brought up shouldn't determine how long you live or the access you have to good healthcare, or even, you know, it's very complicated. It's very complicated, but I think, you know, we can't just lay it all at the NHS and say it's your responsibility to solve this, because it's not. You know, we need to have a thriving economy. We need to, you know, pull people out of poverty. And we've got a massive job on our hands in general.
Yeah, even affluent people. James and I have been in the industry. Our wives who work in the NHS. We've seen it, but you know, we speak with affluent people all the time, and there's massive cancer rates in middle class women. You know, drinking alcohol every evening, that type of thing. The guys are struggling. I don't think it's just. I know the poverty thing gets it as well because they're eating cheap food, but I think it. You know, the people who have got money, maybe they can access services quicker, better to get treated, but they're living. We see it in very poor health.
It's lifestyle, and you know, I'm convinced it's what we put into our bodies. You know, I think all the pesticides and all of the residues and stuff that are on food, or the preservatives in our food and stuff that are contributing to ill health. I mean, if you look at sort of post-war, you know, there was a lot of poverty, and you know, but there was no obesity. People weren't obese back then.
Yeah.
You know, and so what's happened? Well, you know,
Mediterranean diet.
We're addicted to, but even in the UK, you know, olive oil didn't exist. Like, people didn't have olive oil back in the day. It was butter and lard, and yet people still didn't get fat. You know, people still didn't, you know, so lifestyle, I think the food system that we have, and I think, by the way, the UK has it's much better than the US over here. Probably not as good as continental Europe, but you know,
there's such extremes in the US, isn't there? I think they do so much better in terms of research, education, what's available, but the swing is the pendulum goes so far the other way, which kind of counteracts it. Like,
our health Are health outcomes better in the US than they are anywhere else?
No.
The amount of money they spend on it
is this weird sort of dichotomy, isn't it? That they've got so much research and so much available, and yet they're still not benefiting from it. I mean, I listen to podcasts all the time, and the resource that they seemingly have there that we don't have in the UK, in terms of health monitoring and, these kind of things that are coming through from industry that they're not available in the UK. And they're slowly starting to sort of come over here in a small way that will sort of increase. But it comes down to fundamentally the mentality of the individual and collectively how people see themselves and whether they feel like they are worthy of having good health.
Yeah.
And it is socioeconomic, but fundamentally it comes down to, it's not even education anymore. We can't educate people into living healthier lives. It has to come down to the individual and the wanting to get better and improve their outcomes.
I
it's
agree.
An uphill struggle, mate.
I mean, I'm new to the healthcare industry, and I think I'm learning every day from people who are vastly more experienced than I am. I think that's it's a benefit and a drawback. Coming from outside the industry, maybe I've got a naive sort of desire to try and, fix or help, that someone from within is so worn down.
It's highly commendable, mate. It's highly commendable, but those are the fundamentals. Yeah. It's like
I'm not sure it is, James, it's the individual, to be honest. I think there's a societal, social, psychological problems, because you're doing
the collective down to the individual.
Yeah, you're doing stuff unconsciously all the time. If you're being bombarded by marketing, you go to the shops, you're tired, you got to pay your bills, you're just doing small things wrong all the time. You go to the supermarket, you're not going to check 101 ingredients on there. You're consuming it all the time. All of a sudden, you end up sick. You know what I mean?
You look at the kind of growing sort of longevity market, and biohacking and stuff like that. It's like, that the best biohacking you can do is live like a healthy lifestyle with good sleep, good nutrition, a good amount of exercise. You look at different cultures around the world, Japan, Mediterranean countries, but social cohesion and lack of loneliness and purpose in people's lives is key. All of these, in my opinion, you don't need biohacking or, you don't need to be doing what, strapped up to machines and monitoring your, vital signs and taking all these crazy sort of supplements, and we seem to be investing so much time and money into these sort of areas and forgetting actually the real fundamentals of humanity and what has got us to this,
healthy
we're
meals,
abdicating responsibility to the tech
and a hug.
Yeah.
So what's next for you, Carlo? What's the aim with ID Health? Is NHS your sort of ideal avatar of a client to get into the NHS and then be able to service them?
So we're working, increasingly with NHS sort of organisations as we build out our proposition. So we're not in market yet, and we've still got a way to go. But hopefully over the next 12 months we'll have products in patients. We've got a number of sort of pilots and trials lined up. We just submitted quite a large NIHR grant application to build out this deprescribing sort of proposition that we have. As a UK country, company, the NHS makes up the lion's share of the healthcare market here, and that's where we want to have impact. That's where we want to. We're not a pharma company. I want to be judged on what our positive impact is, both from a health outcome perspective, but broader health economics, etc. So we're navigating the complexities of the NHS and all of that. But there will be a private element to our proposition as well. We're not going to die in a ditch as a business just to get, into the NHS. There's like the realities of, running a commercial enterprise is that, you need to survive and generate revenue. And so, we've got some earlier sort of revenue opportunities that we're going to be exploiting. We're raising money. We just launched, our largest sort of fundraise. We're raising £1.5 million, which should be enough to take us through to revenue generation over the next 12 months. So yeah, those are the kind of immediate things. But, from my perspective, it's going back full circle. It's about continuing to learn, continuing to be out of the comfort zone, always looking to improve. We can always do better, learning from others, and hopefully getting enough traction with the right people to I think patients are crying out for the kind of solutions we're offering. It's just how do we implement it in practice? That's the main challenge.
Exciting journey. And just to let us go before we go, what is just to leave for the audience, what's one of the biggest challenges you've gone through, and what sort of wise words so far in your life that could you give to people to say a philosophy of how you sort of overcome that? I think
fear, the fear of failure is, I think, what stops a lot of people from doing things. But it's only really through failing that you can learn and improve. So I'd say, don't be afraid of failure, and you will fail many, many times over on a daily basis, on a monthly, yearly basis. You'll be told no millions of times. And I think that's why it's really important as a founder or an early stage operator within a business that you align what you're doing with your values, so that you can get through those tough times, and that's kind of the message. And just persistence and grit and determination and a lot of good fortune and timing goes a long way as well. But as long as you listen to people, and by that I mean like truly genuinely listen to people, and really try and solve problems. And in healthcare, it's not just about the patient, it's about solving a problem for the practitioner that's treating the patient. It's about solving a problem for the broader health system, and you need to look at the whole sort of value chain and make sure you're solving a painful problem for all of them, particularly in the current climate that we are in when it comes to kind of resource scarcity within particularly the NHS. But yeah, and I always say never turn down a conversation or a meeting, because you just never know where it's going to lead. Some of the most fruitful outcomes have come from the most unexpected places. And be authentic, tell your story, communicate why you're doing it clearly, and people kind of, whether they buy into what you're doing or not, just be yourself.
Yeah, I like it. No, the NHS needs it. The health industry needs it. Public health needs like innovators and people, even like yourself, coming outside of the box. It can help you sometimes to think differently, can't it, about something that's not actually working very well. So no, I wish you all the best for that, Carlo. And where can people find you? Where's the best place to go?
LinkedIn, probably, if they want to contact me sort of personally, www.id-health.co.uk is our website. It's not a very good website, but yeah, LinkedIn's good. I'm pretty responsive on there, so if anyone wants to get in touch, do that.
Fantastic.
Perfect. No, I appreciate you coming on, Carlo, and
it's been great to talk to you both. Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Sit out in the garden now. Relax.
Yeah.
Right,
All
take
right,
care,
guys.
everybody.
Take care.
You take care.
All the
Thanks,
best.
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye bye.
Much love.
Yeah.